Test, test, test. Looking for sound check. All right. Thurgood's online. He says the sound is good. Welcome, everybody, to Canhammer TV. This is March 24th, I think. Yep, something like that. Spring is here. It did rain all day today, but it was like almost 19 degrees. That's Celsius for our freedom brothers. And so it was nice. Yesterday was 16, 17 degrees and sunny. I got out for my first outside bicycle ride of any particular length, and it was good. Still too much snow on the ground in many places, but nice to get outside. And the complete opposite of that is that where we are now has been put back into the red zone for COVID precautions. And so that means, unfortunately, our short-lived reappearance of the live games has to take a backseat again until we can go back into the orange. So unfortunately, there will not be a game this week or until we can go back into the orange, which sucks because we're just getting back into the swing of things. Really, really, it's like annoying. Like play, don't play, don't play, don't play. Those of you who follow and are following or playing in the Ontario 40K League, of course, already know that the start of the league has been delayed till it is soundly into the good zone. So probably around June is the new expected start time of the Ontario 40K League. So that has been put off, and apparently sighs of relief from all the legions of people who have more time to paint their armies. So there you go. Otherwise, GW carries on. We've got Drukhari coming out this week. Book looks pretty good so far. We have AdMech probably coming up in April. We have this Book of Rust and all the things that it's going to bring. We've got the White Dwarf with the new printed Munitorum like points manual. So now we have a printed points manual in a magazine that's a printed version of an electronic points manual FAQ, which is an FAQ of an original printed book. How confusing is that? Welcome to 40K. Book bloat, magazines, supplements, campaign books. It's all back in hardcore fashion. Try and keep up now. So there we go. Right back into it. Okay, we haven't had a Tactica in a while since the Venatari focus. And so this is Tactica episode 51. And tonight we will be going over the fruits of my labor for the last week and a bit, and the labor of some people around me. Talking about secondaries for Custodes specifically. So a while back we did a show on secondaries in general. And so we're going to talk tonight about Custodes secondaries specifically on Tactica. And so we might as well dive right into it. Let me get my notes here ready. So the first thing to say is my usual disclaimers when talking about math and statistics. First of all, I am not good at math. I am not good at statistics. I have never purported to be good at these things. I have a rudimentary understanding of the statistics that I need to understand to look at medical journals. I am definitely not a mathematician or a statistician. Disclaimer number one. Secondly, this is a data source that, and shout out to the ITC Battles app guys. This is basically data that's dumped from the ITC Battles app. So in that way, you must recognize its uses and its flaws. Its uses is great, and we're going to do some of that tonight. It has many flaws. It is just dumped data. A lot of the data fields are not mandatory, so there's a lot of missing data. It can be used by anybody who wants to use the app. So that includes people who just play in their basement, people who play in tournaments, people who play once a year, people who play 6 times a day or 6 times a week. So it is used by the whole variety of people. So given that, you must recognize that the source of data is imperfect. Given that, though, it is a large set of data. It's not huge by any stretch of big data imagination, but it is data, and so we would look at it through the lens that we will prepare ourselves to use. And quite frankly, it's some of the only data we have. That doesn't make it good or useful, but it is data that we can look at. So, the third thing to say is people who know me will know that I'm a skeptic when it comes to looking at data, especially when it comes to 40K data. I'm always reminding people about the limitations of the data that they're spouting or quoting as gospel. And without a recognition of the limitations of data, you cannot comment on data. And unfortunately, these days, it's too easy for people to just throw data in your face with no understanding of where the data comes from, what it's based on, how it was gotten, how it's been interpreted, how it's been presented, and its limitations. So hopefully tonight we can present a properly digested discussion of some of this data without much in the way of hyperbole or lack of understanding. That's the goal anyway. Okay, so I was going to get the book out and go over what the secondaries are. I'm not going to bother doing that because you should know what the secondaries are. Before we start, I want to shout out the ITC Battles app guys for getting me the data set. And the biggest shout out tonight goes to my wife. So she works a lot with Excel spreadsheets and she's very good at it. And this data is basically like Excel style spreadsheet and is very dirty data. As I said, a lot of it is missing. It's dirty. It's just a dump from an app, basically. So it's not designed to be analyzed this way. It requires a lot of cleaning. And me and my, I don't know how to do this sort of way, she saw that I was in such distress and difficulty that despite hating 40K, she helped me out with it. And the amount of eye rolling when I was trying to explain to her what primaries and secondaries are and why this is called Why We Stand, We Fight, and what's... Anyway, lots of eye rolling and all sorts of things, but she's a gem and she still helped me with it and basically made this whole episode possible because I could not have figured hardly any of this out by myself. I'd like to say I'm pretty good at pivot tables now, which she likes to point out that she's been very good at for the last 25 years. But I have now since discovered the power of pivot tables. And now we all know what Ross was talking about on that episode of Friends. Anyway, so big shout out to my wife for helping us clean and process this data in an understandable fashion. Okay. She did not pay me to say that. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is just some basic information about this data. So, first of all, this data is from the ITC Battles app from the date of July 8th, 2020 until January 26th, 2021. This is the latest data set that he had available to give me. So, obviously, this does not include from the end of January to now, which is a lot of like Death Guard, Dark Angels type games, I'm guessing. So that is one limitation. Where we can, I will try and point out things that may be relevant in those specific matchups, but this data is not from that time in the whatever meta that you think we have now. So it's from last summer, basically till after Christmas. This does include data after the latest FAQ when some of the secondaries changed. That was January 7th, 2021. And so it's about 3 weeks of data from that point. And we will be talking about that separately because we've separated it out after much effort. Okay, so just general stats. Okay, so first of all, total games reported was 27,692 games on the ITC Battles app. This is, remember, all games, and many of the games' final scores were like 3-0, 2-1, 6-7. Like, so we are talking about some pretty imperfect data here. Some people probably just started using it, forgot to use it, or they just stopped playing. They were incomplete games. I mean, there's a lot of missing data. So yes, it is 27,000 games, but a lot of those games, I suspect, I didn't spend the time to look at how many. A lot of the games weren't even probably full games. While there is a tab now, there's a data column that says tournament game or not tournament game. Again, lots of missing data there. And just because you play in a tournament doesn't mean you're there to be hardcore. In fact, most people who go to a tournament are not there to be hardcore. So I don't really feel like whether it's a tournament game or not a tournament game has too much relevance on the data. Okay, so out of that 27,000 entries, we had 2,941 games which were played by Custodes, either as either faction or some very occasional mirror matches. And so that's a total of 11% of games involved Custodes in that 6-month time period. That seems about right. I think, I don't know. I have no idea what percentage of people are playing Custodes, but in terms of percentage of people using ITC app playing Custodes, it seems like it was 11%. In terms of win rate in that 11%, we have 1,700 wins approximately and 1,250 losses. So our win rate is not too bad. So in terms of our total points when we win, it averages out to 63, and total points when we lose is roughly 60% of that at 38. So we are not high-scoring faction. Otaki Prince, welcome. It's your boy. Okay, cool. And so we are scoring only 63 points on average when we win, which is pretty low. Now, again, I don't know if that includes 10 point for painting or not, but take it for what it is. And when we lose, we don't score very many points at all, less than 40 points. And so we score 60% more points when we win. Average primary that we score when we win is 35. It's not great to only score 35 points when you're winning, but maybe speaks to the elite nature of the army. And average primary when we lose is only 22. So we're really doing not well on primary when we lose, and that's a difference of about 63%. And when we win, secondaries, we're scoring 28 points. Again, not super great on secondaries, and 16 points when we lose, which is really bad across all secondaries. So, and that's a difference of 57%. So it doesn't seem like we're scoring very high on either primary or secondary on average in these games that we've recorded. Our opponents, when we win, score an average primary points of 35. So we also don't do a great job of denying primary. And our opponents, when we lose, score that's total points, not primary. So when we win, we do deny pretty good. Our opponents score an average of 35 points. That's total points. So that's pretty good. And when we lose, our opponents are scoring an average of 62 points on us. And of course, we were scoring 38. So we're generally getting almost doubled when we lose. The average primary points our opponent scores when we win is 20. And our primary points when we lose, they average 35. And secondaries, when we win, our opponents don't score secondaries well at only 15. So, and when we lose, they score 27. So I think all that really kind of says is that we're kind of low scoring, but we still win a lot. We deny pretty good. I would say we're about, we're up there. We're about average, where you would probably want a faction to be. You don't want a faction to be constantly scoring 90 points all the time, and like 70 points when they lose. I mean, like, it's all kind of, the numbers are what they are. And yeah, so Mr. Funkax is saying it obviously depends on matchup, obviously, but this is an average over 2,900 games. So, the matchup kind of thing is kind of washed out in the numbers. Not washed out good or bad. Who knows what the effect is? We would need better statistics than we have to figure that out. But Okay, there were 132 mirror matches in that 2,900 games, and we won 88 of them. So I guess that's just an interesting statistic. It's not a 50-50 split. It's 88 wins to 44 losses on the mirror match. Interesting statistic. Anyway, okay, so that's kind of overall statistics on like primary and wins and things like that. So let's go to secondaries. Okay, which is what we're here for. Now, I'm going to share an Excel screen coming up right now. You will not be able to see my face for a while, so see you later. Okay, so this is the same kind of table that you saw if you watched our last secondaries episode. It's basically a list of all the secondaries. And in these columns is the number of times in these games where you could have picked it. So obviously the generic GT secondaries are the white secondaries, and the blue highlighted secondaries are the ones that are mission specific. So you get an idea here of the number of times that mission specific secondaries were available to be picked, i.e. the number of times those missions were played, and then the number of times people picked them. Yeah. So you see, for example, at the bottom, there was, and this is just Custodes games, okay? So obviously, Psychic Ritual out of 2,900 games, and we don't know how many of those had Psychers in it. We do not have that information, but it was only ever picked 9 times. And so probably it was 8 or 9 times when somebody was running an Inquisitor and it lost 8 of the 9 times. Same with things like Mental Interrogation, Pierce the Veil, these 3 Psychic, where you have to be Psychic, they're just not working for us and hardly ever picked. And then you have quite near the top. So this is just, this is sorted. This data is sorted here on the column E. So when you win, what's the average number of points you score? And so at the top are some of the more easy to achieve mission secondaries, like Priority Targets, which is an easy 12 to 15 points almost always, and Direct Assault as well. And then you have things like Abhor the Witch, which is very easy to get you lots of points if you are playing against those kind of armies. So, and that was only picked 205 times. So, and then but even that, the numbers those are still mostly losses. So that's interesting to see. So when you pick Abhor the Witch when you can, and you score 12 points when you win, but most of those were losses where you only scored an average of 7.6 points. So that's probably overall not a great statistic, even though it scores you a lot of points when you win. Things like, so Priority Target, let's take that as an archetype. So 282 times available, picked about half of those times. And there was more losses than wins, but even when you lost, you scored almost 11 points, and when you win, you scored just under 13 points. So it's pretty even either way, so that's a good secondary to pick. Direct Assault, if you when you win, you score 12 points, and when you lose, you score 8 points. So not too bad, but that's a 30% drop in goodness there, again, with more losses than wins. Things like Bring It Down, for example, which people picked quite a lot. One of the more common ones picked. And when you win, it was only 17 times. You scored 11 points from it, which is not super great. But when you lose, a lot of the times you only score 6 points from it. So it's poor picking, which is probably the conclusion you can draw from the secondaries. But if you pick it right, it scores you decent points. Same with Titan Hunter. Obviously, you can only score Titan Hunter when you're playing against Knights, which I guess was an average of, say, 60 games. And it does you well when you can do it, but when you can't do it, it really screws you up. Okay. And a lot of the secondaries at the bottom of this list, like here downwards, these are at the bottom of a lot of people's lists and the secondary lists in general. I'm just going to move this so I can see the chat. Okay. So Protoculture, as I already mentioned at the beginning, we're going to talk about that. You see this tab here? We're going to talk about pre and post GT mission changes. This is just all the data right now. Okay. One thing we want to look at here, we want to look at specific secondaries that we tend to pick a lot. So a lot of people, especially even like these sort of more well-known players like John and John Lennon, those guys, they're picking things like banners. Okay, so let's look at banners. And this is pre and post mission change. So banners available obviously all the time. And that's 346 wins to 279 losses. So that's a decent ratio. And that scores you an average of only 8 points. And when you lose, it scores only 5 points. So, I mean, that's not a great secondary. We want to be at least 9 to 10 points. So that's not a super great secondary. And it is one that requires you to play specifically or even plan specifically in list building for it. So that's not a super great secondary. Let's pick another one that people tend to pick a lot, which is scramblers. So for a time, and I don't know if it's still like this, but even I was doing it a lot, people were playing scramblers. And people, at one time, you would run a unit of sisters to do some scrambling, Venatari to do scrambling. At times, you would really struggle, and it would be easy to block you from getting that opponent zone scrambles. And so here we have 186 wins and 204 losses. Even in wins only scoring 7 points, now obviously you can't score 7 points in scramblers at 0 or 10, but that's just average. And in a loss scoring almost half that. So that is not a great secondary, probably because it's very easy to deny against a good opponent. And it's so all or nothing really kind of skews that as well. Okay, and then so while we stand, we're going to talk about while we stand in a bit when we talk about the FAQ. Okay, so banners, popular one, doesn't do that well. Scramblers, even worse than banners. And so let's look at Engage on All Fronts. So Engage on All Fronts is a pretty popular secondary in general. It is picked almost 1,500 times out of 2,900 games. So I think it's the most popular secondary picked. And it's certainly one that I pick almost every game. It does pretty well, 847 wins to 610 losses. And when you win, it's scoring you an average of 8.5 points. And when you lose, you tend to not score well when you lose. And so that's getting into the range of acceptability. And again, it's a secondary that kind of forces you to play in a certain style or to think about consciously when you build your list. And if you do, I think you'll probably average higher than this. And if you just pick this as something that you just pick as standard without much consideration in list building or strategizing, then you probably score lower than that. But this would be the average. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is a secondary that's become pretty popular of late, and that is Teleport Homer. So the way people have been scoring Teleport Homer is that you grab an Alaris captain and you basically drop him into your opponent's zone on turn 2 and beyond, and he does Teleport Homer action for you. And this works, or is purported to work, because of a few things. First of all, he's pretty cheap, 110 points. He's pretty hard to kill, 2 up, 4 up, 7 wounds, T5. and then you give him a relic for 3-up invuln. Then you can make him your warlord, especially if it's your own HQ. That doesn't cost you CP, and it gives you a 5-up feel no pain. And then you can spend a CP for a commander trait, which gives him 2 extra wounds. So now you have a T5, 9 wound, 2-up, 3-up, 5-up guy who basically takes a lot of effort to kill, probably way more effort than is worth if they even manage to kill him. And of course, it's very hard to block out a single 40mm base, and that works well. You don't have to cost them anything to deep strike him, and he just does that. As Mr. Fantastic mentions, using a Calexis is another option because, killing a Calexis can be difficult, although I'd say very much more swingy Calexis than a captain. Having 2-up, 3-up, 5-up, and 9 wounds makes that smooths out the variability, whereas just being able to be hit on 6s and then having only a 4-up save and much less wounds does make that a lot more swingy. And people are more inclined to shoot at a Calexis, I find, but that may vary in your experience. So, and Calexis is only 100 points, I think, and but it does mean you have to take an assassin into your list and pollute yourself. But it is a smaller base, and so it's a little bit harder to block out as well. So anyway, you spend 1 less CP, and so there's all that. So those are the probably two most common ways of scoring Teleport Homer. And in the old days, not that old, but some people would also double that up by taking a shield unit and dropping them in, and then also getting you behind enemy line breaker at the same time. But now you're putting more effort into getting those secondaries specifically. So after using it for 1 game against Francois, he scored me my full Teleport Homers, which, remember, is still only 12 points out of 15. You cannot score max on Teleport Homer because you run out of turns. So that's one downside of it for sure. But, it's fairly easy to score, I would assume, against many armies these days. We don't see a lot of huge horde armies. And if you do get blocked out, then you have to think of something else and you use your captain like a captain. So let's look at Teleport Homer then. So only picked in just under 100 games out of 2940. So it doesn't seem like it's that popular. And when you win, you generally score well with it. So I'd say that the small number of people who are proficient and planning to use it probably score their 12. And when you lose, either because you haven't done it well or you picked poorly against a bad army that can block you out, you basically screw the pooch. So it's a kind of all or nothing strategy that you plan for in your list building and your game plan, and you have to be prepared to abort that game plan if you're playing against somebody who's going to block you out. So, but if you can do it, it is a reliable 12 points, which is pretty good. It's not 15, but it's still 12. That's pretty good. You have to remember, so Scramblers, even it's not that reliable, and it's still, even when it is, only 10 points, which is only 60% of the points you could be getting. And Banners, I haven't seen hardly anybody score, a full 12, 15 points on Banners, even when they're winning. All right. Engage 2, you don't usually get to 15 points on Engage with our army. By definition, you will almost never score 3 points on your first turn, maybe even your second turn on Engage. So you're really looking at, 10 to 12 points on Engage for us. So yeah. Okay. So other things, other secondaries here that are more niche, because it depends on your opponent's army. So grind them down is killing vehicles. So now this is before and after the vehicle change. And I did not spend the time to parse this out before and after FAQ. So take it for what it is with a slight grain of salt, albeit it's only 3 weeks of the data is after the FAQ. And that's almost 1,200 games. Many of them wins, scoring an average of 10 points. So when you have the opportunity to kill vehicles, it was very good, but now that's probably damped down quite a lot with the drop in number of points. So probably if we were to redo this in 6 months' time, which we probably will, this grind them down will be much lower down the list. Assassinate, when people have taken it, which is almost 700 and almost 800 times, winning more than losing, again, scoring you 10 points. And when you have the chance, so you're killing 3 characters. So again, if we accept that 10 to 12 is kind of our aim for secondaries, that's a decent one when you have the chance, when your opponent has aggressive characters or characters that have to stay close to whatever they're buffing. Domination is an interesting one. It's not something you see us take very commonly, but for whatever reason, it's been taken almost 400 times, and it scores pretty well. So, I guess if you have the right list and you plan for it, you could play towards domination, but it's generally not something that we pick very often. Okay, so that is kind of a general look at these secondary statistics. Let me just look at my notes here. Okay, so I got some other notes here. Okay. So let's just sort this data just to highlight it again. So if we sort this data now by when you lose, what's scoring us the most points. So again, priority targets is here. Direct assault, okay. Abhor, okay. Bring it down. But to be honest, after priority targets, it really drops right off the map. So there's no good secondaries when you lose. We're not like Marines where we might lose, but we're still going to score 30 points on secondaries because of standing somewhere. So, so one could argue that our army is kind of win more, but I mean, there's really no win more or lose more. It's just if you're winning, it's because you're playing well. If you're losing, you're losing. So, I mean, we're just that kind of army right now because we don't have a lot of stuff. Now you'll notice on here, of course, there are no codex specific secondaries. It would be really interesting to have a look at that at some point, but that's not included in this data set. I took that out on purpose. Okay. Let's just sort this data in a couple of different ways, just so you can look at trends. Okay, so that's upside down basically. And then let's look at this. So when you win, what is the most commonly picked secondary? And that's engage on all fronts. And that's only scoring you an average of 8 points. So it seems like, and this is a complete hypothetical, if you are playing towards engage, and so by definition owning more table space, then you tend to be winning. And same with grind them down. Of course, that is now secondary is now changed, so that probably drops down. And while we stand is up there. So, and we're going to talk about that in a second in terms of the FAQ split. But in general, with only 3 weeks of the data being after FAQ and most of it before FAQ, it was a decent secondary, scoring you an average of 8 points. And it was often picked when you would win the game. And when you would lose the game, you would hardly score hardly any points. So that just tells you that when you plan in your list building and your strategy to play to secondaries, it probably helps you win the game. And then if you execute it, then that helps you as well. And you note that, so bring it down is here. And then abhor is down here, right? And these are already dropping in numbers. And then the mission ones obviously are good when you can play them, but you don't play them that often. So, this is just an interesting way to look at it. And let's do the other way now. Let's sort this based on losses. Okay, so when we look at losses, again, so if you sort this on losses, it's kind of the same. You're still picking the same secondaries, you just don't do as well. You score much less points, but they're still up here. Engage, grind, which will drop down, bring it down, while we stand, and then banners and scramblers are up here, whereas they were not up here before. Let's look at where banners and scramblers was before. So when you're winning, banners is up here with an average of 8 points, but scramblers is down here with only 7 points. But if we go back now to when you lose, banners and scramblers are both up here, scoring you only 4 points. So I would say that may indicate that scramblers and banners may be a little bit of a trap unless you've specifically decided and made a list to play those secondaries. And banners, obviously, not banners, scramblers will be very variable, and because of the way it's scored, all or nothing, whereas banners will be more granular. So the average for scramblers may be a little bit of a difficult number to interpret, given that it's 0 or 10. Okay, let's go on. For those stat nerds out there, you might like to see some pivot tables. Pivot. Okay, there we go. Some stat porn for you guys. Okay, so now what I did, or what my wife did, is I took all the secondaries only from after January 7th. Okay, so this is statistics only after the change, the FAQ. And I'm assuming that people started playing with the new secondaries the day that came out, which was January 7th. Okay, so we have data from January 7th to January 26th, which is much less data, obviously, but it's data nonetheless. I'll just go back to this screen for now. Okay, so since January 7th, we've had 345 Custodes games, which we have won 213 of them, so that's pretty good, and 137 lost. So that's a decent win rate still. That's a 62% win rate since January, which I don't think anybody would complain about. So specifically now we're looking at the secondaries that we like to pick before and after and how that's changed. And really the one that's really we want to look at here is While We Stand, We Fight. So While We Stand, We Fight is a secondary that really changed for us, that we used to like because we had expensive characters that we could hide and that were hard to kill. And we kind of still like because now you have to kill our whole units, and our whole units are still a little bit difficult to kill sometimes. But it has definitely become a secondary where you have to pay, even you used to always pay attention to what you were putting in your list for While We Stand if you wanted to take While We Stand, but now you have to pay even more attention in terms of what weapons are you putting on them to see if they're going to be one of your While We Stands or not. But certainly it seems like it's a popular secondary right now. So in this 345 games, just in the last 3 weeks of this data, it was picked 99 times in wins and 96 times in losses. So it seems like people are just going in with the game plan of picking While We Stand, We Fight, and whether you win or loss, maybe not, that's something you plan to take. And then when you win, it scores an average of 8 points. So probably we're probably, if you read that data, it's probably scoring you 10 points on average. And because you can only score 5, 10, or 15. And when you lose, it's only scoring you 4 points, i.e. you lose 2 of your While We Stands, you're only scoring 5. So it looks like the average when you win is 10 points, and the average when you lose is probably 5 points. So if you look at it that way then, and if you take the data for While We Stand, this whole data, I didn't calculate the pre-FAQ without those 3 weeks. I just took this whole data as representing pretty much the pre. It's 8.2 and it's 3.9. So it's pretty similar. So it doesn't seem like the how much it scores and how often we take it has really changed. well, they took it here in wins. They took it 17 times. So 99 times in wins. What's 99 times out of 213? That would be like 40% or something. So people are picking it way more commonly now in wins, and in losses. So that's 96 times out of 130. So that's almost like 75%. And definitely that's only 12%. So it seems like there's definitely way more picking of While We Stand We Fight since the FAQ, and it's doing the same as it was before, though. When you pick it, 10 when you win, 5 when you lose. So that's an interesting thing. So it hasn't stopped performing. It's just people have adapted, and it seems like it works better for us, actually, because it's become a lot more popular. And so it's, but still performing the same as it always has been. And I think in general, I mean, if you take the average of all players, okay, then probably you skew towards 10 to 15, and the better players will tend to score 15, but your average player will score 10. So that's still a pretty good secondary then for most Custodes players to seriously consider building into their list and running. So yeah. It does require it to always be in that top level of consciousness, though. You don't want to throw away your units because it's a big point swing. It's 5 points lost and not scored. So it's almost like a 10-point swing, basically. So that's the While We Stand We Fight data that we managed to dig out just in the last 3 weeks. Obviously, we need to look at this again when there's more data, and so probably we'll do this again maybe in another 6 months or so. But so that's interesting. So if you took people's lists beforehand, it was like Trajan, Biker Cap, and then like, maybe like Bertha, right? Because it was model. So those were your While We Stand We Fights before the FAQ. And then after your FAQ, now it is often still Bertha. And then you have things like Terminator units, Venatari units, like whole units, bike units. And so you have these kind of While We Stand targets, whereas it's not the characters anymore. So, and those units can be protected, although you have to spend the CP to do it. And you have to be careful about throwing things away. So, okay. So there we go. This is what I've been doing for the last week and a bit. And painful was it that it was. I hope people enjoyed that. I'll save it just for you guys. If anybody wants it, they can have it. Okay. So I hope that was helpful, guys. What we're going to do now is go to questions. So if you have questions on the chat, please put it in the chat. We'll go to Discord, because we have a number of questions on Discord, and we'll go look at those. It's probably one of the most common questions that I get asked, that people ask in the Discord, and that get discussed in the Discord, is what secondaries you pick. And I think the general advice is that you must think about your secondaries when you're making your list. What are you going to score on? Okay, how well do you do primary? And what are you going to score for secondaries? Can you get at least 35 points on secondaries? This reliably. These are the secondaries you need to aim for, that you can get yourself to 35 points. And so if you look at the data we just showed, you need to get to at least, 65 to 70 points in total to be winning your games. 35 secondary points and like 35 primary points. So I think that's something you has to come into your list building, and then also into your play strategy, obviously. Okay, questions. Okay, we got a question on the chat from Otaku Prince. Is there anything to think about if you run sisters? Well, yes. I mean, I would argue that you're really only running sisters to play the mission and to score primary and secondary. So having a unit of sisters can really help you score primary, obviously, because you have this unit that you really don't need to do anything else. You can sit on your backfield or sit over there in a rhino or do something. So A unit of sisters is really quite good for helping you play the mission, primary and secondary. Unit of girls don't do anything else, so they're perfect action jockeys. So they can stand at the back and raise you banners. They're good for banners. They can stand at the back and do other actions, do your scramblers. They can rush forward in a rhino, do your midfield. It's pretty hard to get them into your opponent's zone. But you could even spend a CP and infiltrate and outflank 2 units of sisters for a single CP and bring them on to help you do that last scramblers, if that is your game plan. And that's a viable game plan. So I think sisters are fine. It's perfect for that kind of stuff. I just wish they were troops so they don't take up elite slots, because that's a real problem for them. But they're when I played my 2 units of sisters and 2 rhinos, they really helped up my scoring potential and opened up a wider world of secondaries that you could pick. So it would be interesting to take a look at these secondaries and see how many of these lists had sisters. So the kind of lackluster scoring for deploy scramblers and for banners might indicate that many people are not using sisters, because it's harder to do those things just with pure Custodes. But who knows? That's a completely random conclusion that's not supported in the data, because we don't have that information. Okay, Mr. Funktastic. Should lists be tailored to achieving certain secondaries, or should you just be picking based on the list you want to bring? Well, I mean, if you're just going to a casual game and you just want to play a list, then play a list and pick when you're there. But if you're serious about winning and you want to be competitive, which is kind of what this channel is about, then you should be making your list for secondaries. And I think that the most successful players, when you listen to them talk about why they chose certain units, is because it allows them to score certain secondaries. Okay. Is there a middle ground? Yeah, I guess you make a list that you like and the stuff you want to play, and then you think about what secondaries you can score, and then you adjust your list from there. So instead of going all in, okay, what do I want to score? Here's what I'm going to bring. You're like, I want to play this list, but I'm willing to make some compromises to score secondaries better. So that's the middle ground. Okay, Castro has a giant question. Let's see. Okay, so he's talking about the Homer captain. Is it viable or not? Well, I think it is viable. So the Homer captain, the Homer statistics are okay according to our secondaries. And so obviously the only way that people are scoring Homer is if they're teching for it in their list, either with the Alaris captain or with like a Calexis. That's the only way that Custodes is scoring that secondary. So at those numbers. So obviously that the fact that those numbers exist and are there and are decent indicates that people are using the strategy, so it must be at least semi-viable. Of course, there's the effect of the Alaris captain on scoring engage too. So basically you have a dude from turn 2 to 5 standing in one quadrant, and if you have him in the middle, he could be on either quadrant. And that makes it way easier for you to score that 3 points on engage instead of that 2. And if you can even score just a couple of rounds of 3 on engage, you're ending up with 11 to 13, 14 points instead of 9 to 10 points. So the teleport Homer captain also makes it much easier for you to score those engage points. And as we already seen, engage is a pretty good secondary for us. So I think the Homer captain works on a number of fronts there. Okay. Yeah. And he's like, after you max the Homer for 2 turns, well, you can't max Homer in 2 turns. You can only max Homer after 3 turns, by which time it's already turn 5. So in terms of him doing other stuff, he doesn't really do other stuff. And now there's like, so Ezekiel can disrupt your action. There's a couple of strats flying around that can disrupt action. So you just got to be careful about that. You know about who can do those things, and don't put yourself in the way where you can be disrupted, because that's a 4-point drop if you get your action disrupted. If he gets charged, no problem. He'll survive most shooting. If he gets charged, you can still fight and do your action. But if he gets disrupted by one of these new things, then you're in trouble. Okay. Best or most reliable action secondary in your opinion? Well, I'd say probably Homer if you tech for it. But generally, the action ones aren't great because we don't want to be having a 300-point unit doing a freaking action, right? Like that one game I played where I dropped in 5 Venatari in my opponent's zone because he let me, but then they stood there doing nothing to do a scramblers. That was painful. I mean, and it still only gets you 10 points in the end, right? So that was kind of painful, but if you got to do it, you got to do it. Sisters are good for actions, obviously. So Homer, Scramblers, obviously, and Banners. I think if you're going to play Banners, so you got like 3 Guardian units and they're sitting on objectives doing Banners, then they got nothing else to do, so make them do Banners. While we stand, yeah, so we talked about while we stand. What secondaries to take at different points levels? I'm sorry, I have no idea. I've never played a game like less than 2,000 points. I think I've maybe played one in my whole Warhammer career. I just don't know, and I think Custodes in general is probably a pretty skew army below 1,500, definitely below 1,000 points. I think our power level ratchets right up because our guys are just as tough at 500 points as they are at 2,000 points, and people can bring much fewer things to take care of you at lower points. So I feel like our army gets much stronger at lower points, but I don't know that in any way, just from what I hear. What enlists makes where we stand, we fight viable or not? Well, I think Telemons are very popular right now, often in multiples, and they make good while we stand, we fight targets. I mean, Bertha's really hard to kill, and you can make him harder to kill with some cleverly used strats. I mean, Shadowkeeper strat on Telemon is really quite gross. And if you have Woods or a Banner or -1 hit, like 5-up save against mortals, like Telemon is pretty hard to kill and requires a lot of efforts. So probably what people are doing is losing one of their Telemon over the course of a game, and so scoring 10 on while we stand, because they're running multiple Telemon and you have to focus to bring one down. So the other common, like a big unit of Terminators is pretty hard to kill, especially if you don't play them super aggressively, right? Because you can protect them. A big unit of Bikes, similarly hard to kill, especially if you don't YOLO them all the time. Any of our big units are hard to kill. So a unit of 5 shield guys with Misericordia is 275 points. That's often a target for while we stand, we fight, and it's really hard to kill those guys. So you have to expend a little bit to put the daggers on. 5 Venatari, because they're so mobile and that last guy can go and hide, he's very good for while we stand, we fight. I've yet to lose like a full unit of Venatari except when I YOLO'd them into White Scars. So like they're still pretty hard to kill. So yeah. I think a lot of our army is very good for while we stand, we fight, which is probably why we actually benefited from the change, and what the statistics would support that it's more popular now after the FAQ and is still as good as it was. So I think it's a great secondary. Okay, how many points do you think we should be scoring to be considered a good secondary? As I say, I would say 10 is like the minimum. Can you take secondaries from current codex, or do you have to be chosen from so yeah, like you have to take it from the GT book if you're playing GT mission, obviously. But if you have a new codex, you have your own codex specific secondaries you can pick. We just don't have that yet. And if you're Marines, you can take the Marine one and you can take your Dark Angels one, and so it becomes a bit silly. And then we can get into a whole discussion of whether or not we should have those secondaries. And obviously we have them, and it's unfair when lots of people don't have them. So I think we should hold off judgment until everybody has them. Okay. Are there any must-have units for specific secondaries? I think we basically kind of covered that. How many hours till the show is live? It's live right now. Protoculture. All right. How important is denying secondaries? Okay, so that's a great question. So if you were here in 8th edition, Custodes only won by doing 2 things. 1, not dying, hiding and not dying. And 2, denying ITC secondaries at the time, ITC style. And we were very good at that because the secondaries were not really designed with Custodes in mind, and we happened to deny a lot of them. And we weren't such a force in the meta that the ITC ever felt it was needed to change secondaries to tune us down. So now, though, And especially as each book gets at least one secondary that's seemingly auto 12 to 15 points, denying secondaries is much more difficult. And there's a really good balance actually in the secondaries of allowing armies to play to other strengths like mobility, board control, outflanking, or just standing somewhere or in the middle. If they have more units, just doing things like banners. So we are good at denying kill secondaries. Like, I don't feel like anybody's ever picked attrition against me, or whatever the kill more one is. So, that would be a bad pick against Custodes. Assassinate, like those kill type secondaries are probably poor against us. But there's lots of secondaries beside those, and in fact, many people don't pick those anyway. In fact, even as a relatively killy army, I don't really pick the kill secondaries very often either. So I think, we deny kill secondaries pretty good because we're still relatively tough, but not many people are picking those secondaries. And if you do, then that's to your advantage, I think. So if people do make the mistake of picking the kill secondaries, you can certainly deny those. Otherwise, other than like you're just playing the mission and your opponent's playing the mission, and sometimes it's really hard to deny things like engage on all fronts and stuff like that, right? Especially with our army, which doesn't have a lot of board control. So it's harder for us to deny those more commonly picked board control type secondaries. It's really hard to deny things like banners if it's just on their own back two objectives. It's hard for it to get there. But yeah. So and this new wave of codex specific secondaries that auto score you 12, 15 points is just like you can't deny those at all. Like it's I feel like no secondary should just auto 15 point you. Like you saw in the game against Francois, like basically it was his 90 points not to score. It was autoing 15 on Oath of Moment, autoing 15 on like Stubborn Defiance, and autoing 15 on the priority target's mission objective. So it's like auto 45 points on secondaries. It's up to you to try and disrupt his Stubborn Defiance to chip a few points off of that. But it's really hard to disrupt any of the other stuff. So I don't feel like that's good for the game, and they've been trying to tune that down, right? Like grind them down was super strong, and now they tune that down. So I suspect that they will tune that down at some point. They're just probably waiting for more data. Okay, Lyle Dixon, new to Custodes. I love the Virtus Praetors from an aesthetic standpoint, but don't really see many when I scroll BCP results. They seem to be good for while we stand and engage. So what am I missing? I don't think you're missing anything. I think people who are playing bikes have got good use out of them. I think people who don't find bikes that good are probably using them too aggressively. And as I mentioned, if you watch the Tactica on bikes, this is the number one learning point I think from that Tactica is do not play them over aggressively. Says the guy who literally YOLO'd them into Dark Angel's army on Thursday, but I feel like they got the value for why I did that. But so I think bikes, as you say, are very good for getting you board control, deep strike screening, objective control, midfield, even your opponents. They were my one chance to try and get onto disrupt the Stubborn Defiance, right? Because they're OBSEC 2, and then they're very good at doing those kinds of things, engage, and So I think they have their place. Whether you want to run them really depends on if you got the points, really, because they're still pretty points expensive, and obviously they're going to help you get engaged. I think if you run like a 5-man bike unit and you don't YOLO it, and you're willing to spend some CP here and there to transhuman them, I think that's a very good while we stand option, because then you're down to one bike, you just YOLO that dude 20 inches in the other direction behind a rune, and he's got your 5 points safe with him. And that one bike is far away without many things attacking him. It was really hard to kill that last biker. So, I mean, my last biker almost survived being hit by 5 Terminators, Azrael, Banner, and all those fucking guys who were in that corner, right? My 3 bikes almost survived that counterattack. So, and I didn't spend any CP on it. If I transhuman those guys, like I did end up transhuming the last bike. Maybe I should have transhuman the whole unit. with Trajan. Probably I should have. They might have survived. I didn't think they were going to be anywhere near surviving. Anyway, next time maybe I'll do that and they will survive. And one dude left over can do a lot of things. So I think bikes certainly have their role now, especially since they can carry salvo launchers. If they get new Melta rule, that would be sweet. But they're not Melta technically. So yeah. Okay. Jim Steele, always good stream to watch. Thank you, Jim. Mr. Fantastic TLDR. Okay. Let's go back to questions, but I think that was all the questions. Nope, Thurgood, literally, I think Thurgood's watching the stream and typing in Discord, although he could just type it in the chat. But so build a list that can hold 2 primary objectives, contest a third, complete secondaries as much as possible, and ignore opponent secondaries. That's basically the game plan, right? So you need to get 10 points a turn reliably on primary every turn. If you can do that, you got your 45 points. If you can do that 4 turns and then just still 40 points. If you can do that 3 turns and get 115, say turn 4, turn 5, that's still 45 points. So primary, you should be getting close to 40, 45 points. It's disappointing when I look at the stats and people are not getting that. That is obviously a lot harder on the half the missions where it's hold 2 to get your 5 points. Way harder. And so that's probably where those numbers even out when you play those missions. But on the 1-2 hold more missions, you should be maxing primary. And then secondaries, as I say, you need to be able to score like 35 points on secondaries reliably to be winning. And so you need to put that in your game plan about how you're going to score those points. I don't think you need to spend too much effort these days thinking how you're going to deny secondaries, other than denying kills if you pick where we stand, we fight. While we stand, we fight. That's kind of like denying. But I think in the old days, ITC would be like, okay, how can I deny the secondaries? Now it's like, I don't think you should put too much brain power into how you're going to deny somebody from scoring secondaries. You just got to score more than them and hopefully get a few hold mores to get the higher primary. So if you would go into a game assuming both players are going to score 40, 45 points on primary, then really the game turns into a game of secondaries, and you need to be scoring in the high numbers for secondaries eventually to pull that game off. So that's kind of the approach you need to your list building, I feel like. Okay. So that is it. Okay. Well, thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Do follow and like and subscribe. Consider Patreoning us. And join the Discord where we talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And yeah, that was fun to talk about. I'm not doing math now again for a very long time. And hope everybody stays safe. And we'll see you guys next time.